Hi, I'm Mary Hoffman, and I've been asked to talk to you about actual costing in Visual ERP. So I just have one question for you. Is actual costing important to you? Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, you make product at your company. Do you need to know all of the elements of the cost of that product? Do you need to know what material costs were, labor costs, those outside or subcontracted services that go into that job, and the burden that goes along with all of those things? Is that important to you? Do you need to know those elements, material, labor, services, all the way through a multi-level bill of material clear to the finished item? What I mean by that is it important for you to see the labor contribution, the material contribution, the services contribution, and that burden contribution all the way through every subassembly as it gets issued into its parent item, clear to the finished item so that I can see the total labor contribution into a finished item. I'm not talking about rolling that labor of a subassembly into material as it moves into the next finished item. If it's important for you to see these things, then I'd like it if you'd spend a little more time with me in a few minutes, and I'll show you how actual costing is done in Visual. I have one more question for you. Does the actual cost of a material sometimes change even after it's been received and issued into a job? Does that ever happen? I'm talking about things like purchase order changes after a receipt, or an invoice is different from that purchase order cost. Does that happen? If those things happen, if these things we've talked about are important to you, then I'd really like you to see how Visual handles actual costing, and I'm going to call it true actual costing. Let's spend a few minutes and look at that. Let me set the stage. Here in Visual, that job costing, work order costing, product costing, the heart of that is right in our manufacturing window. So let's take a look at that manufacturing window. I'm assuming you've seen Visual before, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what you're seeing on the screen. This is a visual representation of a finished item for me. The name of that finished item is an NW9000. It's fabricated piping. In order to make that, I need some materials. Those are on yellow folders. I also need to go through some steps in my shop. Those are on blue folders. So I take some materials. I need to cut those. I have more materials that need to be welded. Then it's going to move on to quality and into blast, and then some verification before it's ready for shipment. We might notice that one of these folders is a different color. Well, that's because that is a subassembly. A subassembly that I might make ahead, I might put into stock for a while. Maybe it's very common among other jobs, among other finished items. So that's a subassembly rather than a purchased. Let's just take a look at how that subassembly is made. So here now in this child window, I can see that subassembly, that SB pipe 2 over here is equal to this bill of material and routing, where I can see that I need some raw material, some pipe that I'm going to cut, then a gasket that I'm going to weld in with that pipe. Another way to look at that might be in indented format. So that might be more familiar to many of you. So here's the top level assembly starting at the beginning. Some materials go in, including that subassembly that has its two materials, the pipe and the gasket, and then some additional materials as I move into welding. So that sets the stage. Now, let's talk about costing. We'll close down that indented bill, and let's take a closer look at the subassembly. Now this subassembly, of course, has costs associated with it. It hasn't been started yet. I haven't actually added any true costs yet, any actual costs. But here I can see what I expect this to cost in a summary form. I can see what I expect it to cost in material. We've got some cost for that pipe, $12.14. Some cost for that gasket is expected, $4.81, for a total material cost of $16.95. I also can see labor. We're going to focus on materials here first. Now let's go look at the total cost of this job, or of this subassembly, is expected to be $301.95 with $16.95 of material. Now let's take a quick look at the parent assembly and its costs. So again, this work order hasn't started yet. I have just estimated costs. Those estimated costs are a total of $763.15. And if we come down to that subassembly, we'll see that it's $301.95. But notice that my expected costs are, I'm expecting to maintain those buckets of material, labor, burden, as that moves into the upper level assembly, as it moves into the parent. I'm not going to lose the labor contribution, the burden contribution, or visibility of that by rolling those two into a material cost as it moves into the parent. So let's watch all of this happen. We'll go over to that subassembly item. And first we need to buy this material. So let's get that purchased. I can purchase that through the normal MRP, through signals, using the material planning window. I'm going to just buy those two items directly to this job by first looking at the summary of the material availability. Here you can see that I have none on hand. I need to buy those. I don't have any coming. I don't have any on hand. So let's buy both of those parts while we're at it. And I'm going to purchase all these selected items, which takes me directly to creating that purchase order. And notice that the price came in as expected. I'm going to just save that, which will automatically email that over to the vendor if that's my preference. We'll email that over to the vendor and get it coming and get it received. You know, as a matter of fact, let's say that when I talked to that vendor, that instead of $12, for whatever reason, this gasket was now instead of $4, the gasket is now $5. And you know, I might yell at him a little, but when I'm done yelling, I'll send him a copy of that PO or a changed copy of that PO. So now we have a gasket for $5 that we're expecting. Time passes and I receive these goods, and because I bought them directly to the job, they're not going to take a stop in inventory. They're going to just get marked for this job and staged for this job. Let's go ahead and do that receiving. And of course, receiving isn't going to touch the cost, or wouldn't be likely to touch the cost. So let's receive this entire PO. In it, we'll receive both those parts in its entirety. Now this PO is done, and if we refresh the screen, we'll see that we have them coming. They have been issued here to our job. That's why I have those completion meters. And now if we go look at cost for this subassembly, I do have some actual costs now. I've got some actual costs for materials, but there's a variance. I expected that gasket to cost $4.81. It cost $5. There's a variance. So, now let's see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and finish some labor. So we have labor costs here as well, and I'll be back in just a moment. So I created two labor tickets to get our labor entries in there and labor costs. I am not doing that at any different cost or different amount. I'm not trying to create a variance from labor at the moment. That's not what I'm trying to show you. So when I did that, not only do I have those completion meters across materials, but I'm done with those 2 steps as well. And here's what our costs are looking like. So although we expected our cost to be $301.95 for this subassembly, because of our variance with that material, and if we have it, our actual cost is $302.14. Now, if I open this variance up, you'll see that that variance is all in material, not in labor. Our labor actuals came in right on target and matched our expected. So for each of those steps, and also for the burden that's associated with those. So now we have a subassembly that's at a little bit different cost than we expected. So as we move that into our next level assembly, I want to see that it carries that actual cost of that subassembly, and that it also maintains those, it keeps intact those cost buckets of material, labor, and burden. So let's go see how that happens. Come out of this, we don't need this subassembly anymore, unless we want to refer back to that overage. But here is our parent that we're now ready to start charging materials to and charging labor to. Oh, before we do that, why don't we go look at the value of the subassembly that we put into stock? Let's go do that. We'll run an inventory valuation report for that subassembly, that pipe. And we should have 1 in stock, and it should be at our new cost. Let's go check that out. Sure enough, our quantity on hand is 1, and the value of that is $302.14, which includes that change, that increased price for one of its subcomponents. So we still have, so now we have, instead of the expected material cost initially of $16.95, because that purchase order cost us more for one of the components, this item, as it moved into stock, took that fully loaded actual cost to the cost of this item. Now we'll come out of that report, and we'll go back into the right back into our work order, and let's go issue this material now, this subassembly. Let's say it's in stock, we pull it out of stock and charge it into that job. Now, I didn't bother putting serial number or lot number. This is not a tracked item, but let's go do this inventory transaction entry for this particular item. We'll issue the one that's required and save it. And we'll come out of that. And now this should show as issued. Sure enough, it does. Now let's go look at the costs. Costs. Okay, so now we have 1 actual cost. Break that open. That is for the subassembly. That's the only thing we've issued so far, and sure enough, it's at its higher rate, no longer the $301.95 that we expected. It's for $302.14, and that's because that material was more than we expected. $5 for the gasket and $12.14 for that pipe. So now we're getting that true actual cost. I think you're starting to get an idea of what I meant by true actual cost. The other thing that I want you to notice is that not only did that subassembly came in not all as material cost. That $302.14 is not just material cost. It has kept that labor and burden, and if there were outside services, intact. It did not roll all of those into material cost. Many systems will roll that into material cost, roll that subassembly cost all into material cost as it's issued up to its parent. Now, what I'd like to do next is to show you what happens if now that gasket that we bought, even though its price was at $5 when the PO was received, and yes, we see that rolling into not only its parent, which was the subassembly, but subsequently that cost is following into the finished item here, all the way through all of the levels. So now let's go invoice that PO receipt, and we'll accept a higher priced invoice, and let's see how that plays out. So let's pop over to AP invoicing. Now, one way I can do that is to jump over here using that document lifecycle. I want to remind myself, oh no, I'm sorry, this is the wrong, I didn't order anything from purchase orders on this. We made that item, we didn't purchase that item. Let's pop over to AP and process an invoice. So let's, we've opened the mail, we get an invoice, we see who it's from Deary Hardware, it has an invoice number on it, and it is for a particular amount. Well, we're expecting an invoice for $17.14. Well, let's say that this says $18.14 instead. And now I can specify, what receipts that have not yet been vouchered this matches to. And we'll just take that last PO that we did. That's ours. Sure enough, there's our pipe and our gasket. We'll say, yep, this is the one. And now the amounts here equal 1814 if I override this to a 6, from a 5 to a 6. So we'll say that item then, instead of being invoiced at $5 each, it was being invoiced at $6 each. So now those two match, and we'll save this. Now, because I have on this vendor, I allow for an overage, I didn't get a warning. If this was a vendor where I required an exact match, and we'll just show you that very quickly, just so that no one in the room panics that we didn't get warned about that. But so let's say here I can specify whether that needs to match exactly, or if I've done business with this vendor before, or it's the type of product where I'm going to have some variation, I can set a range, which is what I did in this case. So that's prevented me from getting a warning when that invoice did not exactly match my purchase order. So now we have this invoice that we have saved, that we've processed, and but it's for a different amount than what our purchase order amount was for. So let's see how that affects our cost at I expect that to not only affect the cost of that subassembly, but also to affect the cost of that subassembly's material rolling into the parent item. So back to our work order, let's pull up costs again. And let's see, now we expect that to have increased from 302 to a variance or to a cost of 303. And yep, sure enough, and now the variance, instead of being 19 cents on material, is now $1.19, rolling all the way through from that subassembly all the way up to the parent. Once again, keeping those buckets intact through multiple levels of the bill of material and true actual cost, true material cost flowing from a change in a PO invoice, flowing through the subassembly that it was issued to and on to the parent that it was issued to, all the way through to the top assembly. That's what we call true actual cost. So once again, let me ask you, is actual costing important to you? Do you need to know all of the elements of cost? Do you need to know all of those elements of cost all the way through the multi-levels of your bill of materials to the finished item? And do you ever have the situation we just watched where that actual cost of a material sometimes changes even after it's come in and been received and issued to a job? I didn't have to back any transactions out. The system was able to help to show that flow all the way through. With visual, we have true actual costing.